Before we get started with today's episode, just a reminder, if you're watching this on the Crossing Broad YouTube channel, we'll keep putting episodes there for a bit, but you want to make sure that you go over and subscribe to our new YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@snowthegoalie. I think we're up to like 250 subscribers, which is great. We want to get to like 1,000 or more. I saw last week's episode already had like, I think close to 1,000 views or 1,000 watches. So if you're watching on the Crossing Broad channel, thank you. Welcome. Make sure you go over to @snowthegoalie, the youtube.com/@snowthegoalie. If you pop it into the search bar, I think it's Snow the Goalie Flyers podcast. Subscribe to that channel. All right. With that, let's get underway with today's show. Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into Snow the Goalie, the only Flyers podcast, the People's Podcast, Players Podcast, Prognosticators Podcast, Pedialyte Podcast, Papers Podcast. Oh my God, there's only 4 games left in the season podcast. I'm Russ Joy at Joy on Broad, joined by Chris Terrian, Bundy at CTerrian6. But this week, as per Bundy's request last week, I'm going to start off with another man, a man who can't be bothered to join us from the comfort of his home. He's going to make editing this a pain in the ass. And that, of course, is Anthony Sanfilippo. He's on the road doing deliveries at Ant San Philly. How are you doing? I love the shirt. How you feeling out there?
Doing deliveries? You make it sound like I'm an Uber Eats driver or something.
I was thinking meth, but, sure. Yeah.
Doing great, Russ. Couldn't be better. All is right with the world. Things are moving and shaking with the Flyers. They're bringing in Billy King to kind of help pick the next general manager. And I joke about that, just throwing it out like that, kind of sheepishly. But I honestly don't think it's a bad thing, and we could talk about why later. But I'm looking forward to the off season here. I know there's only 4 games left, and there's not a lot to talk about in these games. In all honesty, last night's game was kind of a mess against Dallas. 4-1 they lost, and really by the second period they were out of it. So there's really not a lot to talk about team wise. But there is stuff to talk about where this team is headed going into the future and what's been going on kind of around the team, and mostly involving people that aren't players, right? I mean, that's what the conversation is going to predominantly be today. So yeah, I'm kind of geeked up for that.
So let me get something straight here really quick, because I think it's important that we do this. And Bundy, I want to make sure that we get you in on this as well. There are 4 games left. Tortorella's up in the box. He's not coaching right now. The assistants are running the show. There was a hell of a standout quote from Rocky Thompson this week. We want to get there. Put us in the mind of a player really quick here. 4 games left, lost season, very clearly writing on the wall. There are certain players who will not be back next year. They're going to be players that this team's going to try to move on from. As a player, how do you get yourself motivated beyond the regular, like you want to earn your paycheck or whatever? How do you motivate yourself to get up for these last 4 games in a lost season?
Just pride. Self-pride would be what would motivate me, to go out and try to do the best I could for my teammates, for the team. I mean, it's not been a great year. I mean, they spin it sometimes and saying they've had good stretches and they're, defining who the young guys are that are worth keeping. And that's good and everything. It's an evaluation period, really. The coach goes up in the press box. It's funny. No coaches do that, right? Unless you probably have a really big ego and feel like, I'm going to go up and watch with the GM because I'm going to leave. No coaches leave the bench ever to go to a press box and watch. So it tells you a little bit of the state of mind, I think, of the coach as well, which is fine. He wants to have it sounds like he wants to have a pretty big, be a big part of the plan moving forward. And when you leave the bench like that, to me, if you're a player or anybody around the organization, it's pretty clear that you've got your hands in everything as well as coaching. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but that's certainly what I'm seeing from it. Giving your assistants a chance to coach it's fine, but they're assistants. Like, nobody leaves it. I asked another head coach this week what he thought about Torts going up. He's like, I just never really thought of ever leaving my bench to go view from the press box unless it's a preseason game. It just that's not what we do. So it's odd from that, but there's an evaluation period. There's a sense of urgency, I suppose, from what they're doing. But again, guys, it's great and everything. And yeah, they're trying to look into the future, but I mean, you can't go pull a player off a tree. It's not a leaf you can pull off. Like, you have to find those players and then execute it. And so, you can go up there all you want. You can have your assistant coaches bark about how bad players are and you're not going to play, and the coach can be in the press box, but that's still not going to get you better players or fix the problem for you, because I could sit on the end of the bench, or I could sit on the press box and tell you who's shitty and who isn't, and it's not going to change the view for me at all. This team needs talent, high-end talent, and you can scream it from the press box or the roof of the Wells Fargo Center as loud as you want, but until that happens, it doesn't really matter. We know what this team has. There's guys that have had good stretches, younger guys. But there's other guys on other teams. There's young guys on other teams that are having stretches like that or better at the same age. So, I'm just trying to be realistic here about what my eyes are seeing from the standpoint of where everything's at. I think they need to get a hockey ops guy in here pretty quick, because right now, to me, it looks like the hockey ops guy is John Tortorella. And whether that's I think he really wants this team to be successful like we do, and to have a future and be part of the vision of that, like as he does. He's part of the team. We're not, but I think sometimes, I just think there needs to be some order. Even John Tortorella has talked about that order himself, in his press conferences. He was saying last week, it was maybe the end of March, where he's talking about, we have people like standing in the hallway between the players' locker room and the coach's room. And he's like, and I don't really know what those people are doing there. They shouldn't be there. I can only guess at who he was talking about. But when you have like people that are not part of the game that night, that are kind of like, leaning against the wall, like wallflowers, and just kind of getting in the way, I think these are observations that he's made through the year. And as much as he's talked about some of these people, maybe that he had to clean up, like I know he's constantly talked about the trainers from last year, which nothing has been better this year with the new trainers. I mean, it's not like it's been a complete, like everybody's been healthy and put back on the ice. So, he evaluated that coming in, but then I guess he's seen some other floaters probably hanging around the locker room that he feels are not of worth to an in-game product that night. So there's a lot of things he's evaluating. And when you start talking about things off the ice, you're doing a real house cleaning and taking a house cleaning look at things. Again, I'm not applauding it, nor am I detracting from what it is, but this is what it is right now. And Anthony probably say that's why it's important to get a hockey ops guy in here right now to start structuring what this looks like. Because right now, no offense to Danny, it looks like the John Tortorella show. And he's calling the shots however he wants to call them right now. Because to be quite honest with you, he can. He's the guy that's not connected to Chuck Fletcher. He's the guy Chuck didn't even want here. Danny's still connected to the Fletcher regime and all those guys. But Torts knows that he's the guy that's connected to this team now. It has nothing to do with that. So I think from his standpoint, he's thinking, well, I'm a coach, but I've also got an open lane. They just fired a GM. There is no hockey ops. There's a president that really is no longer part of the actual NHL structure or a player. So I think from Torts' standpoint, he's like, I'm going to take full control of what I can take control of. And when you leave the bench to let your assistants handle games end of the year, that's the message you're sending. Let me move my
it's interesting.
Take over, Anthony.
Let's get Ant in here. Let's see if it's working. Go ahead, Ant.
No, it's working the whole time. It's just the magnet on the back of my phone has dropped off, and so now I gotta kind of hold it in place, which sucks.
And he froze. All right, so here. Well, oh, there he is. Okay.
Anyway.
What a mess.
Anyway, point is, I know what Bundy was saying is pretty spot on, because what John Tortorella is doing here is he's realizing that this is an opportunity that a lot of coaches don't get, to have a little bit more influence over personnel decisions. Now, there's a reason that the concept of having a coach also be like a general manager type has not worked in professional sports. A couple people have had a little bit of success with it, but for the most part, coaches and GMs have to be separate people because it's too much for one guy to do, right? So it's not like he's trying to be the GM, but he's trying to have a little bit more influence for the decisions that are going to happen with this roster going into the offseason. And like Bundy said, it's because currently there is an interim general manager and no president of hockey operations. So he is really the most tenured person that's not on the ice, that makes decisions for this organization, right? So I think that John looked at this opportunity to spend a few games up in the press box with Danny, because from what I'm told, there are a few players who they may have kind of felt differently about, and that John wanted to kind of talk with Danny as the game's going on and watching these individual players play and highlight what he's seeing and whatever. Because the other thing to keep in mind is Torts is very old school in that he's an eye test guy, and Danny is more of a hybrid who does buy into some of the analytics of hockey. And I think that their goal together is to try and find a way to marry those two. And how can they do that and be on the same page on specific players? Because there are some players where the analytics will tell you one thing, but the eye test will tell you something else, either positively or negatively about the player, in either regards, right? So I think that's kind of where things are right now, and I think that's what Tortorella's goal is by not being up there or not being on the bench, but being up there with Danny.
So I think this whole thing's a mess, and I'm going to explain this really quickly, right? From my perspective, there are a few things that are at play here, and I think it gets very messy. And I'll have the unpopular opinion, I guess. I don't think that John Tortorella should be above the team, which is where it feels like he's been placed, whether by himself or he's been enabled to be that. We can talk about him being the longest tenured. We can talk about the fact that he won a Stanley Cup 2 decades ago. But he's almost playing the role of overreaching. It's fine as a coach to have the desire to want to have input in what the team could look like next year. He's the only person who really is under contract in his current position long term. Briere likely will just be given the GM role. But at this point, like there is such thing as overreach. Briere's job as the GM, as at least as of now, is to kind of build out the staff or kind of put in place what staff he thinks is going to belong here next year in the front office. And those people should be the ones evaluating the talent. Of course, you have to take input from your head coach, but I've never seen this before. And what this ends up doing is creating a weird power imbalance. It creates a very strange optics thing. I think a lot of fans probably don't care because there's a high approval rating of John Tortorella from this season. But it creates a weird power vacuum. And it also kind of begins to cascade to other avenues. So like Bundy, the quote that stuck out this week came from Rocky Thompson, who was coaching in Tortorella's place while Tortorella was up in the box. And I don't want to demean what an assistant coach is or what their role is supposed to be. I don't want this to come off as, slandering, I guess, an assistant coach. But when you as the head coach, as the longest tenured person, the guy who won a Stanley Cup 2 decades ago, when you go off and make the decision to go up in the box, or you're enabled by the interim GM to make that call, you can put yourself in a position where an assistant coach goes off and says something that could ultimately be detrimental as you look to make addition by subtraction in the offseason. And we've talked around this clip. I want to get to this really quickly. This is Rocky Thompson, an assistant coach under John Tortorella, post-game earlier this week, talking about the players' effort in that game. So let's, you know what? Hold on. It went behind. Let's go here and then here. Nope. Didn't do what it was supposed to do. All right, we'll figure this out in a second.
We'll figure it out.
There we go. Here we go. Here we go.
I just said it's not about X's and O's. I said, and quite frankly, it looks like some guys in here don't even care. They're just not trying. And I said, I'm not going to call anybody out individually, but your teammates know, and you know, and I'll give everybody another chance here. And if you're going to do it, then I'll keep playing. If you're not, I'm not going to play you. And so, I don't have that authority typically as an assistant coach, and I'm a little bit more of the good guy when you're the assistant coach, but at the end of the day, black is black and white is white. And so I think the message got.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, Bundy. Like I get conceptually what he's saying, right?
Well, he parroted the coach, right? Like,
yeah,
that's
but
what people don't realize is that there wasn't a lot of tact in that.
Yeah.
And he generalized everybody. So what happened is that you'll go guessing, you'll go home and you'll wonder if you're that guy, unless they've already said it in the room. I mean, this is why head coaches should be on the bench talking after the game when they're doing it. But again, I don't know Rocky Thompson. I mean, I know he, decorated tough guy when he played, in the minors. But again, I don't know what. That's a comment that you hear from a coach, assistant coach, if you're a player, and it'll probably go right off the back hearing it from him. Like, that's like, if a guy came out and said that, like, and I'm thinking, well, was that me tonight? You're going to have nights that are bad nights. Like, you're just going to have rough nights where you're just going to have a bad game. And sometimes that happens. It doesn't mean it's a lack of effort. Was there a lack of effort in games? I mean, to me right now, what a lack of effort would be, or guys that don't care, are doing still when you're not doing the little things right. Like winning for me right now, if I'm a coach, what I want to see is how hard do guys want to win the one-on-one battle in the corner, because that shows you compete. And there's no fighting anymore. You don't have to worry about any of that. So one-on-one battles in the corner. How willing are you to block a shot? Because now is really the most meaningless time to block shots. I watched the Dallas game last night. There was a defenseman that just decided last night. And this is a guy that got benched, like a D'Angelo got benched last night. But there's another defenseman last night that wouldn't even put his body in the way to remotely even try to block a shot. Didn't want to make a play behind the net with the puck, got stripped, made awful. So, I mean, are we going to sit that guy next game? And again, I mean, most people, I don't even need to say it. I don't even need to say anybody's name anymore. Fans, if you watch, will figure it out for yourselves. But so clearly you're messaging now that you've got a guy like D'Angelo who's got another year on his contract, that you sat him out because, quite frankly, if that's what the coach said, the assistant coach, well, then that's what he's saying about D'Angelo, that he didn't compete and he didn't care because he got benched the next game. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, listen, people are going to say what they want to say, and Rocky is right. Usually assistant coaches don't have that type of power or luxury to come out and call guys out, even though I'm sure they would have liked to. But there's little things that you can look for right now beyond what the skill is to find out what your compete level is that are invaluable to me. And a lot of them are just simple little things. And if you don't see them, and if you don't see guys willing to still do the basic, simple hockey things that make your team a good team every day, that goes beyond making elite skill plays or making a great power play, there's all a ton of intangibles that are as important that you have to grow together as a group. And if everyone's not pulling on that weight, it looks bad and it doesn't feel right. And I think that's where they're at. There's been a lot of frustration, Russ, and we're 78 games in right now. Yeah. I don't need to, hear with 6 games left that the head coach is going to the press box and we're going to reevaluate everything. And I got the assistant coaches talking about the team after and everything. I knew this 3 years ago, long before any of those coaches were even here. So this is like old hat to me. Welcome, welcome to the new millennium. I mean, I've watched this for years. And especially the last 8 or 10 years, the way this thing was built around. And, you look at a guy like Giroux. I don't think the Flyers would still be out of the playoffs if Giroux were here this year again. Yep. They probably would have looked a lot like Ottawa at the end of the year. But, I mean, it's all like a big vicious cycle. And until the Flyers get out of that cycle right now, start drafting higher, unfortunately, you're going to be mired in mediocrity for a couple more years, certain low mediocrity. But there's a lot of work to be done here. And it's one thing to subtract. Yes, this team needs to subtract players. but it also needs to find the right ads. You can't just go add anybody just to fill in that subtraction. They have to be the right pieces now. And I think this is all how it all comes together with, with Danny, with Torts, the coaches talking. They're trying to do it by committee right now because they don't really have any and hockey ops to figure out exactly what, how this thing looks down the road. That's why I think Torts has taken a very major piece of this and is trying to run with it in a situation that he usually wouldn't have any kind of clout to do that, because coaches just coach. You just get some coaches will maybe tell you their GM what they're looking for in an off season, and then you'll have coaches that just stay out of the way. Hey, you figure out your team. I'll coach the players you give me. I'll evaluate my own personnel and determine what kind of style we're going to play. But it's been, I'm all about being fair. That's all I'm all about. There's players that in this league that just can't play. Some of them at this level. There's a lot of players. There's a lot of teams, and some guys aren't going to be a fit for you. When you look at a lot of the teams that have won Stanley Cups, they're pretty darn deep. 1 through 4, their lines are well designed. Every one of those teams that's won a Stanley Cup lately, they all have a superb number 1 defenseman, not a number 3 or 4 that's masking as a number 1. That's not it. Like, they got a Victor Hedman or a Makar in Colorado. I mean, those guys are super studs. And if you have a great goalie, well, except for, with Colorado, they were able to do it in ways where they didn't have like that Vasilevsky type of goaltender.
They didn't have, they didn't have an Alex Lyon, huh? How about that? Former Flyers prospect Alex Lyon going 4-0-0. He's got like a 968 or 986 save percentage last week.
It's a great story. There's a lot. It's unbelievable. But that's the fact, really, guys. When you look at it, you need to draft high. Most teams, I can't think of a team outside in the last long time that didn't win a Stanley Cup having one of those top 2 or 3 picks on their team that weren't just super impactful. Crosby, maybe Detroit might have been the last team, but they had the best defenseman to ever play besides Orr, I guess, with Lidstrom. There's a lot of work to do. Anthony, we were just talking. I know we lied. Anthony's going to the ball game, the Phillies, the opener, and we're hoping that the scoreboard's working. I don't know anything more about that. It's just a rumor I've heard. Yeah, Anthony, there's a lot going on right now. And I think a lot, I really feel like, as Tort said, I think a lot of people are trying to do things here that they're maybe not accustomed to do, because there is a lot of care for this organization. And I think with Tort's only been here a year, I think he realizes now that he may be the guy in turn that is the one that gets assigned with or tasked with some of these jobs after the season's over. So that's why I think he's taken more of an active role. I don't love the press box move, but if he wants to go up there, he's been around forever. It just looks like a real power move. Like, I'm going to head up there.
It's all power and ego.
Yeah, it's absolutely a power move. But I think it's an endorsed power move, if that makes sense, right? Like, I mean, I think that the people that are going to be putting the new president of hockey ops in place, meeting Dan Hilferty and Val Camillo, and plus the people that they're working with from outside the organization in the search process there. I think that they're all okay with this. Like, I think that they're all blessing this because they feel like Torts can offer a perspective from up there with Danny that, and have the opportunity to do it. It's not, you say it's never been done before, but if let's say this kind of works out a little bit, right? Let's say the Flyers go into this offseason, they purge some players and some contracts. I hate this.
There goes his phone. Jesus, this guy.
All right.
This guy. Listen, here, while we get him back, tell me I'm wrong. All right, feel free. When this team hired Tortorella, when they brought in the outside agency and they chose to hire Tortorella, which was not Fletcher's desire, I said at the time, this has all the makings of a power struggle. This has all the makings of Fletcher gets fired and Tortorella decides to try to take things over. And I asked you guys at the time that Tortorella was hired, is it possible that within 3 years we see him move into the front office? Is there a chance that we see him try to move up make that transition and kind of be part of the overall macro view of this organization, because it seemed, based on his age and based on the amount of years he spent behind the bench, that could make sense. Him doing this is the ultimate power play. It's an ultimate ego trip. I hate to be the person that always feels like they're offering up the dissenting viewpoint here, but like, this just comes back to John Tortorella, right coach, wrong time. Because if he fundamentally believes that he needs to be part of the structuring of the organization, not just the roster, but the organization as a whole, and if the people above him believe that like he needs to be part of like establishing what the vision of the team is, then he shouldn't be the coach. Then move him to the front office. Move if you're that hell bent on it, then let Tortorella either be the GM and move Briere up to president of hockey ops, because he had been trained, in his prior stops to be more of a president of hockey ops than a GM anyway. Then let Tortorella be the GM. Or if you're going to have Tortorella, have legitimate say, then let him be the president of hockey ops and hire a new coach. Like, to me, there's no way to have an equitable power structure here where Tortorella is allowed to do this kind of thing now and then is expected next season to just kind of, shut up and coach. I just don't see it. I don't think that there's enough of there's too much of a sample size here to indicate that Tortorella is not going to want to be subservient. So if that's the case, just put him in the role. If you want to enable him to do this kind of thing, then let him do it from a higher perspective. And by the way, I'm not going to complain. If they ultimately decide that John Tortorella needs to be the president of hockey ops for this team, fine, let him. I think it's totally fine, because I will stand resolute in the belief John Tortorella will not be the coach when this team is ready to contend. He's going to be too old or too burnt out. So, put him in the position that he can have longevity with the organization for the next 5-10 years in a front office role, and get a coach in here who
he's already got. If John Tortorella does that,
the vision,
then his coaches are already here. Right. So there won't be, if that happened, Shaw or Rocky would be your coaches.
That's assuming that they allow. Now that is
if
assuming
that happens.
But here's the thing though, Russ, and I hear what you're saying, but the reality of the situation is John Tortorella has no plans on doing that anytime soon. May he want to do it when his contract is up after coaching for 4 years? Maybe he would want to move into a front office position at that point, but he doesn't want to do it right now. And
then he should be behind the bench, Ant. He shouldn't be pulling this bullshit, because while you were off, we pulled up the Rocky Thompson quote. Yeah. And what the problem, and we didn't touch on this, Bundy, the problem with that kind of quote coming from the assistant coach is it is counterintuitive to what needs to be done and what the head coach says needs to be done, which is addition through subtraction. Because if your assistant coach now goes out and, to your point, parrots what the head coach had said, right? It just puts another layer of difficulty on moving some of these players, because it becomes clear which veteran players aren't checking, or which ones are checking out, which ones aren't buying in with a few games left in the season, or which ones might not have been buying in throughout the season. It makes that job so much harder, because you kind of committed an unforced error by putting the assistant coach in a position where they can answer those questions publicly. Back to you, Ann. It's just, this is the frustration. Oh wait, no, he must be going in. This is an all-time, Bundy, when I tell you, this is a frustrating episode with Anthony. In 5 years of doing the show, he's checking in now, I guess, to go get into the parking lot. Bundy, like, am I totally off? Like, let me know if I'm totally off.
Yeah, you got to be careful with you have when you're doing your messaging in a certain way. Listen, I don't really. I'm more old school too. Like, I don't really give a shit too much about feelings. Like, everyone's worried about everyone's feelings now. Like, if you play like shit, don't be too hard on them. We want to be good next. Like, that's just garbage. I had my ass ripped more times than you can shake a stick at. And it was never, when I got called up to the office, it was never about, oh, you're playing great, keep it going. They're always trying to do something to keep you motivated and keep you on your toes, or to meet your potential. This is just, it gets to a point where you get certain guys that if you feel that they're worth keeping, it's fine. But there's no point just pouring gas on a fire that we already know is burning out of control. You have to turn over, I would say, 70% of this lineup. Maybe, I don't know if you can do that, but that would be what I'm thinking. Yeah. If you're at 70%, you're at 23 guys. You're keeping 3 out of every 10. you're looking at keeping 7 guys.
You're not
Yeah,
gonna
that's
be able to
probably
do
that's
that.
actually probably too many. I mean, seriously.
No, I mean, but you know what?
I'm just formulating in my head, but I'm looking at it like, there's 7 guys that you could keep here because there's no other team in the league that's going to be able to find. You're not going to be able to find guys where you keep, like, you look at Colorado, they probably want to keep 17 guys. But if you're rebuilding a team like this, like where they've been at the standings year after year after year now, it's a complete overhaul. And maybe. Anthony, we're guessing. I'm saying how many salvageable
by the way,
players?
though, Bundy, that's part of the problem with standing pat at the deadline, though, right? Because if you had moved off of a few of the contracts, it makes it easier to have turnover in your roster.
But nobody wanted those contracts, Russ. Like, that's what I tried to say at the deadline. Like, you'd say, talk about moving JVR or Kevin Hayes. There had to be a financial part of that done. And that's where the last GM just, I don't know if he was sleeping at the wheel, if he was driving the vehicle at all. I have no idea. It looked like a real mess, like an actual hot mess when that guy was running the GM's office. It was a disaster. But I don't know what went on. But these are moves, to me, Anthony, that needed to happen a while ago. And again, we're asking how many salvageable players, if this team wins a cup in, say, 7 years, 6 years, let's imagine them. How many guys from this current team could be on that Stanley Cup winning team? And I said no more than 7, maybe less.
It's probably less.
Yeah.
I mean, because turnover is quick in hockey.
Yeah.
And they don't have any superstar, right? So without a star player that usually has the longevity, it's more likely that the players on this roster are not here when that happens. And if you're saying 6 years from now, that's your date. Thank you. Sorry, it's opening day for the parking people too, and they had to figure out if I was on the parking list or not. Anyway, so yeah, I think that when you say on the current roster, I'm having a hard time coming up with 6. In all honesty.
Well, and they're going to go down spots and layers in the lineup, right, Anthony?
Yeah,
like first line guys would have to be third line guys.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a couple of the younger players are still here. When you say that in 6 years, do I think that there's players in the organization currently who will be here in 6 years? Yeah, I do. I think that obviously one of the goalies is going to be here. Cutter Gauthier is going to be here.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 or 2 other guys, maybe like a guy that they just called up, like Ronnie Adder. They have a lot of, they think highly of him as a defenseman. Like, I think he's a guy that could still be around in 6 years. Maybe Owen Tippett could still be here in 6 years. I think he's going to get a contract at some point that's going to probably extend out far enough that he could still be here.
By the way, kudos to Chuck Fletcher on that move. We'll give the guy credit there. Tippett has really been an impressive young player for this team this year.
Well, if
there's one good thing left from the Chuck Fletcher regime, it's not bad that was the guy that you got in the trade for your captain. So
I think it was an accident. It was an accident that worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Sometimes you need happy accidents, though, right?
Either way, it still would have been a good trade because Chuck was trying to get a first-round pick in 23. Florida ends up moving that pick for a defenseman instead, and so then Chuck has to settle. Once it became obvious that Florida was really the only team he could work with, Chuck had to settle for a first-round pick down the line, and Tippett became like the make good, right? Because it wasn't a first-round pick in 23. Tippett became the make good, and it turns out that that ends up being a really good trade because you get a very useful player that's in the league now, and he's young, and he's turned out to be pretty solid player, and you get a first-round pick, and all Florida got was a month and a half of Claude Giroux. So it ends up being a really good trade for the Flyers. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, what you see now is very likely not on a Stanley Cup team 6 years from now. But I will say this: if you feel like you can be a playoff team within 3 years, and I think that that's a reasonable belief, that you could at least get to that point within 3 years, then I do think some of these players still have good value for that build to get to that point and be part of that. And then you can start a backfill from there. So I think that that's a reasonable expectation. So if you say to me on this current roster, how many guys, if you say in 3 years, they're in the playoffs, how many of these guys are there with them as a playoff team? I think 7, 8 is probably a legitimate, realistic number, but I don't think that that's a number that they get to for a Stanley Cup contender. I just don't. I think you have to purge more than that in order to get to that level.
Well, here's your problem, right? So if you look at where this team is in terms of contracts, in terms of length, AAV, the likes, right? The guys that maybe fit the 3-year window are your Sanheims, your Konechny's, and your Provorovs, who are either 26 or 27 or about to turn 27. So by that time, 3 years down the line, they're going to each be in that 30-year-old range, right?
Yeah.
By that 6-year window, they're in the same general frame that you were at with like Claude Giroux at the end of his time here. You've essentially, in that case, you've kind of set yourself up to repeat history again, right? Because unless you're of the opinion, and maybe you guys are, unless you're of the opinion that Travis Sanheim is going to bounce back next year, and Ivan Provorov is going to bounce back and fix glaring holes in his game that he has not to this point, and Travis Konechny is going to return, remain fully healthy, and kind of build off what had been a largely positive year this year. Those are probably 3 of the players that, in theory, you would want to say in 3 years, if you're a legitimate playoff contender or whatever, that they're here and they're part of it. And by the way, at least 2 of them have contracts that are going to be hard to move. If you're unable to move those, or those guys can't take that step, it just kind of further implicates the problem that you have with this last GM and giving out some of these deals.
Yeah.
Because it's put you in a really tough position.
So I think what they're going to do, I think you're going to see some changes with the roster this year of some, and that could include 1 or 2 of these players being shipped out. I mean, I think that's going to be part of what the rebuild has to be.
Yeah.
And even if a couple of them make it to that 3-year mark, Russ, where it's different than with Giroux is that you have to assume that rather than do what they did with when Giroux was in that prime, which was just constantly Band-Aid it, that they are starting to work the process of getting younger and better and have guys develop as your better players are hitting that early 30s time frame where, okay, we have to be good then or else the player is not worth hanging on to, right? So I think that's the one difference, that they're going to try and do it a little bit differently that way than they did the last time with Giroux. But you're right in that regard. Like it could snowball to that point. But I do think that this offseason, one of either Provorov or Sanheim is gone. I'm not sure which, but I do think they move on from one of the 2. I think Konechny's name is going to come up a lot. I think we're going to hear a lot of rumors about it. And I think if they move him, it will only be for something that they really feel like they're getting value because they really like him. To me, that's the hardest player for them to move internally. Like they really would rather not, but if they have to, they will. But I think there are other players that could well be shipped out as well. And they're going to try and get out from under bad contracts. Like we know the Kevin Hayes thing with Columbus is probably going to happen. We know we know that they're going to probably try and move on from D'Angelo. I think that there's a possibility, if depending on how things go with the Team Canada investigation, they could conceivably try and move Carter Hart as a way of bringing back assets that could help the rebuild quicker.
I hope we didn't just have people drive off the road.
I think these things can happen. I'm not saying they're definitely going. The only one that I'm 100% confident in is Kevin Hayes going to Columbus. I think that's I think that's a done deal. I think it was a done deal at the deadline. Just, hey, we just can't do this until the offseason kind of thing.
Because they didn't want to pick up points and screw up their lottery odds.
And they also didn't want to pay the salary this year. Right? I mean, they didn't want to take that salary.
Why would they? Yeah.
Yeah. right? I mean, if you're a bad team, why are you taking on salary?
The
Like that?
D'Angelo thing may be tougher though than you think. Ed. He's got 1 year left, right?
Just one. Yeah.
That's why I was thinking maybe at the deadline might have been a better time to get rid of him.
It probably would have been.
Yeah,
Bundy.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. But I do think that you might find a team that is looking at it and saying, hey, it's only 1 year. It's not a ton of money. It's about, what that kind of defenseman gets paid in the NHL this year. And if he's going to be a guy that we bring in to play third pair, but he could be on our top of our power play and help our power play, and you're a competitive team, you might consider, a 1 year flyer on Tony D'Angelo and not have to pay a lot for it. The Flyers are just looking to get out from under it, right? So you probably, it's not going to cost you much of anything. So I think that he'll move. I think that he'll go. But yeah, I do. If I had to say right now, you look at the 22 guys, 23 guys that are currently on the roster. I think you're flipping over at least 8 for next season. So.
Yeah, and you don't know what that's going to look like, the new turnover guys. It's you're not going to flip everyone you're not going to get rid of a B and pull in an A. Right. You might actually get rid of what you think's a B, and you might actually be getting a C back for it, but you don't know that until it happens. And then like with the Owen Tippett, right? You didn't know that was going to be a big part of it. So, that he ended up panned out as well as it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Real quick, I know we wanted to try and keep this episode a little bit shorter, and my adventures today have made it a nightmare. But did we bring up at all the hiring committee for
No, we should though. So to bring people back in, a big hot button issue last off season was the organization going out and hiring a consulting firm to conduct the head coaching search, emasculating the GM and president of hockey ops at the time, and ultimately choosing to hire a coach that he didn't want here. Because surprise, surprise, the coach won out. If only the show had said that from, I don't know, the moment it was very clear that was where it was heading. So, and you wrote the story up on Crossing Broad, and I think we're going to name this episode Kingmaker. Maybe, I don't know. So Billy, don't call him Gene King, has been brought in as part of a committee to look for the next president of hockey ops. Those of you who hate basketball might still know the name Billy King because he was unable to add any talent of value around Allen Iverson in his time as a Sixer. He's also the same GM who executed one of the worst trades or pair of trades in NBA history. That was one, by bringing in Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce to the Nets and trading off massive assets to the Celtics, which allowed them to reset and have a much larger and longer window as a successful NBA title contender by trading away Garnett and Pierce. So Billy King, not exactly the greatest track record in the NBA, and yet he's going to be on this committee. He did, by the way, do a nice job with WIP as an occasional host in the morning show. But Anthony, break this down for people and let them know why they should believe in Billy King being part of the committee to find the next president of hockey ops for the Flyers.
Yeah, well, so Billy is the lead name from his company, Modern. I think it's Modern Executive Consultants or whatever the official title of the company is. But basically, what they do is they help corporations hire executives, and Billy's the head of their sports and entertainment department, right, to try and help in that field. And so it's a group of people from his company, not just Billy King, but he's the point person for the company. And he was brought in to work with Dan Hilferty, Val Camillo, and then Neil Glassberg, who was the guy who was the head of the group that brought in John Tortorella last year, to help pick the next president of hockey operations. Billy King's involvement does not bother me a little bit. And I know people are automatically tying it to his tenure as a general manager of the Sixers, but no one's asking Billy King to come in here and pick hockey players, or make hockey decisions. They're asking Billy King and his company to come in here to evaluate candidates from a business and operations perspective, and to offer, some thoughts on that. Billy's a smart guy, obviously, graduated from Duke, right? Really, really bright guy. And another thing about Billy that I think that is valuable in this is that he served in this very same position, albeit for another team in another sport, but in this city. And so he knows the landscape here and understands how this person is going to have to be a public facing voice for the organization. And I think that his input could be very valuable in that regard, to let the organization know. Because remember, Dan Hilferty is a CEO who has now publicly stated, like, he is not going to be the hands-on hockey person. He is a big. He knows the sport, understands the sport, but he is, and Val, although she's had a big turnaround in the past, year plus, she's still not from Philadelphia. So I mean, she's learning it and getting it, right, but she's not originally from here and has not been here with a team that has been successful yet. So I think that's part of it as well. And then Neil is an outsider who knows the hockey people, so he's going to bring the names in, right? But he's also not a Philadelphia person. So I think Billy really kind of gives that end of
institutional knowledge.
Yes, that's Russ's. One of your favorite phrases.
No, no. Institutional knowledge is fine. It's good because Billy King is going to be able to point out to this next hire which popcorn machine works the best, which urinal you should avoid on game day, like all that. It's all. Yeah. No, the Philadelphia angle to this, you're right, is really smart. And while they're not the exact same role, he served at a high level. I joke about like the soda machine or the popcorn machine and everything, but like there is something about knowing how things function in that arena as well, and with operations and with staff and all of that. Bundy, one, have you been approached about being part of the hiring committee? And two,
no, but I should be. No. Seriously, I'm actually not saying it. Like I know everybody in the league, every agent in the league. Again, I don't put it out there, but I'll say, like, yeah, I've been around Philly. I understand what the fans want. Anthony does too. There's people that do know it, and I'm not saying that being arrogant or cocky, but yeah, I know the entire hockey world, who the good people are, who the ones with good integrity are. I'm not saying those people aren't. I have no problem with Billy King either being part of it. Nothing. Like he was here. He understands the market. But yeah, I think you do need a big Philadelphia voice in there to kind of like that played here a long time. I mean, there's a lot of guys that should be in there. Keith Jones, maybe. Jones didn't play here long. I don't know if he played 60 games here in this city, but he's made a name for himself afterwards and certainly understands the fan base. But, I think that should be a discussion. Maybe, now that you just brought it up. But this is, again, guys, I've always said, like, I'm kind of babying the whole thing with the Flyers in a lot of ways to me because it's a special thing. It's a special place in my heart, and it always will. I love them. But they got to do this right, and that's where I think I think there's a lot of people trying to do a lot of things, maybe beyond what they're supposed to be doing. But one of them is having an opinion and being able to voice that opinion with clarity so people understand it.
I want to keep your feet to the fire here because it's been rampant speculation on Twitter and on Facebook. I've seen you tagged in a bunch of these things. People have tagged Snow the Goalie in it as well. There are people who immediately assumed that with Coatesy's retirement, that you would go right back into the job on the radio. And there are people who are clamoring for it because you were the best person at that job. I would argue on radio and on TV. I mean, I don't listen, at this point, I guess I have a reputation for, not being afraid to trash different things, but like Coatesy didn't do it for me. I thought Coatesy's corner on TV was funny for a while, but like I didn't get insight from Coatesy. You, on the other hand, and I would have said this before, I knew you and saw how big you were in person, and that you know where I live, and it definitely doesn't have anything to do with that. But like
I'm a
you
softie.
were by far the most knowledgeable person, conveyed things and had institutional knowledge again of what it is to play in the city. And like people want to know if there's a chance there. So I guess, is there a chance there? Have there been conversations? I don't know how much you want to dive into it, but like people have been speculating, like where you at right now?
Well, I read it on Twitter, and it's mostly from the fans because I did it. But so my whole story, and I don't want to share it. I'd like to save an episode for how this whole thing went down, because there's a whole piece to this part of 2020 where I was relieved of my duties. But I want to talk about how it happened, because I actually found out what happened, and I've been sat down and explained to, and with full clarity. I know everything that happened and the people that were involved. And they're scumbags. I've known that anyway. But the part was, as you go back, guys, I'll tell you what happened. It was 2013. And I was doing radio. And I had a good run on radio. Me and Saunders had amazing chemistry. Tim Saunders has called me, and he already told me, he said, if someone asked me from them, this is a couple weeks ago, if there's a replacement, who I'll tell them. He goes, I'll tell them there's no one else but you. That's nice and everything, because I had great chemistry with Timmy. But I want people to understand, I replaced Coatesy at the request of the hierarch at one time to go to TV. So I was on radio. They put me on TV because I was good on radio. I was also good on TV, and I'm not going to lie, because I don't think people come and say, I don't have anybody come and say, boy, you were shitty on TV. No one has ever said that, or radio. I carried the water for the team. I carried the right message. I protected the people that need to be protected, but I was honest, really, really honest. It was NBC that backdoored me and railroaded me. There's no surprise. It was not the Philadelphia Flyers. It was NBC Sports Philly and the couple of lowlifes that run that joint. And that's it. We'll get into what happened and why I think that happened. But the way that NBC Sports has treated people that have worked there, unless you're really doing a heck of a shine job, you're not really going to be around there long. They dump on everybody. They shit on most people. And if you're good, they really want to get rid of you for whatever reason. There's a lot of egos there. But would I do it? I don't know, Russ. I'd have to look into it. I mean, listen, if it helps the Flyers, it clears up the message. But people are like, hey, why don't you replace Coatesy on radio? I already replaced Coatesy on TV. It's not a replacing job of replacing Coatesy. It would be that there's a job opening and maybe what I wanted. I don't know, because I'm doing so much amazing stuff right now, guys. Like, I did a whole career change. All I was accustomed to in my life was doing hockey. I was a programmed hockey player, programmed hockey personality in the locker room. I was the guy, and I think most guys would tell you that when they played, I was the life of the room. I was the comedy in the room and the guy that kept things loose, and still had to play top pair of minutes every single night. So I brought a lot to this organization over the years. Broadcasting was a fit for me because I would like to talk, and I shined through with it. But it was not the Flyers that had anything to do at the end of the day with me being relieved. I want to share the story before the end of this year, because there's a whole lot of stuff that people out there don't know that's gone on, and it's gone on for a little while. So it kind of makes me smirk at a little bit of a grimace. You guys know. We won't get into it right now, but retribution and road to redemption are beautiful things, guys, and they can be out there for you at any single time, no matter what you do. But you know what? I said to somebody the other day, I'm going to be quick here. I love working with you guys. I'm untethered. This has been also something, and another reason I think that I lasted as long as I did here in Philly is I'm extremely passionate, but I'm also extremely loyal to people. And I always want to try to do the right thing. I don't like seeing people get screwed. I don't like seeing people get their legs cut out from under them, because it doesn't need to happen. But I was around here for 27 years, guys. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. And I'm glad I got some clarity in the last few months as to what happened. And I would love to spend 30 minutes in an episode talking about it. Would I go back to radio? I don't know. I have 2 daughters still playing basketball. I love watching it. Things have changed. And the work I'm doing in the city now, helping people struggling with addiction and getting them into recovery and seeing lives change, has been the most impactful thing that I've ever gone through in my life. And if there is a happy median, would have to try to find that. I never say no to anything, I'm just saying I don't know. So
That's fair.
yeah.
By the way,
Absolutely
you use the phrase "road to redemption." People can still get a book titled that, right? Somewhere.
Yeah, I actually, Road to Redemption's out there. Yeah, I mean, listen, amazingly, I was like, someone said, yeah, I want to use Road to Redemption. I'm like, what are you fucking kidding me? There's no other Road to Redemption. See, I tried to go the episode without the F word. I just couldn't do it today. I couldn't do it. Yeah,
so
but you know what, guys?
We were so close.
You know what was great though? But Philadelphia is like just the best to me. Like, I love it. I bust chops on Twitter. Like, even the people I break stones on Twitter, I love them. Like, and it's just some days I get up on the wrong side of the bed. But I love the Flyers. We do. I know they're trying to do the right things, guys, but they got some work to do. And if radio, if the price is right and the timing's right, what the hell, Russ? I still think I'm better on TV, but I don't know. I don't want to have to look at these guys.
Handsome fella, you.
Feast on this, not that.
So Russ, I know we're at the end. Did you find we have Bundy? I got to tell you, we have one of the best 5-star reviews, one of the funniest 5-star reviews we've ever had, and I want Russ to make sure he reads it because I was laughing so hard when I read it the other day.
Okay,
I got it.
You found it, Russ?
I got it. Yeah, okay. I did.
Go ahead.
Hold on. We have, I think, 4 new 5-star reviews, so we'll get to those. Yeah. And the one that Anthony wants is the one that we'll get to last.
Yeah.
First one is 5 stars from Weech1. Love your podcast. Watch when I can. Listen every week. By the way, if you're watching, make sure you go subscribe. We talked about this at the start of the episode, and if you've lasted this long, get your keister over to youtube.com/@SnowTheGoalie. Subscribe over there. Hit the little bell so you never miss the show, right? All right, let's get back to this. I grew up with the Flyers. My first memory of life is on my father's lap in the old Spectrum watching a bench clearing brawl against the old Colorado team. I was 3. I love the fact that your focus on this podcast is the fans' passion for this team, their knowledge of the sport, and your dedication to sharing your honest insider knowledge of the sport. I have lived outside of the Philadelphia area since 1992. The NHL used to have one of the best packages for out-of-market games. Depending on satellite or cable, one could even get the games in HD, which mattered very much in the early aughts. The recent contract has destroyed the package. Now one has to subscribe with multiple streaming services and packages. I do not get any games on TBS due to my cable provider, and my local games are not on television because he's in the Seattle area, or she. If the national broadcast has the rights, it's crazy. As a hockey fan, the app is awful. The NHL destroyed user interface that sadly the MLS and MLB copied. I wish the NHL case about the fans, okay, that was a misspell. I wish the NHL cared about the fans' user experience. I hear it still works wonderfully above the border. Keep rocking the pod. Next one's from Dom1285. Awesome analysis. Great show. Even better inside analysis. These 3 keep it real and don't hold anything back. And then third one, favorite podcast, 5 stars from Rog and Rolla. Great job, guys. Love the chemistry between the 3 of you. I never miss this podcast and truly appreciate you guys giving your honest opinion of the organization. Keep up the great work. And now we get to the one that Anthony was the most excited about. This one is from Wiglet888.
That's it.
Best Flyers podcast around. By far the only Flyers podcast worth listening to. Added bonus is the 3 hosts look exactly like they sound. Bundy looks and sounds like a man who spends his free time chopping wood and living off the land at his cabin outside of Saskatoon.
I'm from Ontario.
Ant looks and sounds like my Uncle Sal, who ran numbers growing up on Germantown Avenue in the 60s. And Russ looks and sounds like the squirrel who shows up on my deck every spring. Keep up the good work, boys. I'm a squirrel.
Such a great 5-star review. Such a great 5-star review. By far. By far my favorite.
There was a guy who worked at the Westchester University dining hall. I don't know if he still does. Back when I was in college. And I don't know why this popped in my head, but it's squirrel related. Every day we would ask this guy how he was doing, and he'd have like some kind of quip. And the one day I don't know what happened to that guy that morning, but we said, "Hey, how's it going, man?" And he goes, "Man, I'm just a squirrel out here doing squirrel things, trying to get a little some from a female squirrel." I was like, "I just want my omelet." What the hell is that? What kind of response is that? So anyway, that was a moment. So I'm a squirrel. Bundy's a lumberjack. Ant is just somebody's cousin Sal or Uncle Sal.
Running
That's
numbers.
great.
That's a bookie thing.
Right off of Frankfurt there, Frankfurt and Germantown Ave.
Yeah, running numbers on Germantown Avenue.
Anthony, you got any odds on Claude Giroux's Ottawa Senators making the playoffs?
Yeah, ain't happening this year. That's
Ain't happening. You know, Bundy brought this up.
The Ottawa
earlier.
Senators were the Philadelphia Flyers of the last 10 years this year. They were exactly what they. Okay, I'm not getting into this. I'm gonna get shit on. The Ottawa Senators became the Philadelphia Flyers of the last, like, every other year for the last 10 years.
And you know, you are gonna catch some heat because you said it, but it's true.
This is true.
And they looked like a team when we went into the season, and we said Ottawa looks like they're going to be better than this Flyers team, which wasn't much of a stretch. But they added some actual talent. They had some injury issues at different points in the season. But like it's absurd. Like this is to a T what a lot of the Claude Giroux years ended up being. With 3 games left in the year, they are 8 points out of the final wild card spot.
And he had a great year. He had a magnificent season.
They would have to hop over Buffalo, who's just ahead of them.
No, they're done. They're eliminated.
Over Pittsburgh. No, I'm saying, like, listen, if they had like 8 more games, they would still have to jump over these teams. They'd be in a battle with Sidney Crosby again. Crosby's team is 1 point out. I believe they've played the same amount of games as Florida and New York as the Islanders have. So that's actually going to be an interesting race to watch here going down the stretch.
Yeah.
Let me throw it to you guys because this will mostly play out by the time we record next week. Of Florida, New York, and Pittsburgh, 2 teams have to make it. Which 2 teams make it into the postseason out of those 3? Keep in mind, Florida and New York have 1 extra point over Pittsburgh. Each team has 3 games left to play. Who makes it? Florida, New York, Pittsburgh.
Doesn't Pittsburgh have an easy schedule?
They do. Florida's playing the best of any of the 3. And Pittsburgh has the easiest schedule. So I'll say Florida and Pittsburgh. Not that I think either one of them wins in the first round against Boston or Carolina. But I think those are the 2 that get in, and the Islanders just missed.
Florida actually has a better chance of beating Boston than certainly Pittsburgh does.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
There's no doubt. So anyway.
Yeah.
So
what you're saying is Ron Hextall is having himself a hell of a season. I wonder if he makes it. Does he make it to next year? I guess we'll find out.
Well, if they make the playoffs, he'll get another off season, I'm guessing. If they don't, he'll get fired. And so will the coach. They'll probably turn over everything.
Question: If he gets fired, is he going to go across the street to like a hotel lobby to hold a secondary press conference like he did here, or does he just kind of go off?
I went to that.
Anyway, did you?
Yeah.
All right, so I guess that's a good place to end for this week. As we mentioned about 40 times on this episode, if you are watching right now on YouTube and you're on the Crossing Broad channel, that's A-OK. But make sure you give us a follow over at our new YouTube channel. Eventually, all the episodes are going to migrate over there. Live streams that we do for the show are going to be exclusively over there. So make sure that you follow youtube.com/@snowthegoalie. You can search it in YouTube in the bar. Do Snow the Goalie Flyers podcast. It's more likely that it'll pop up. The channel will pop up there. And hit the little bell so you know when we do a live stream or when a new episode hits. I think that's it for this week. You can also follow the show wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music. We're also on Pandora. I think most or all third-party podcast apps. If you have one that you like to listen to for some reason, you can find us there as well. So for Ant on Twitter @AntSanPhilly, and Bundy on Twitter @CTarian6. I'm Russ @JoyOnBroad. Remember, you can follow us and the show on Facebook.com/SnowTheGoalie, Twitter.com/SnowTheGoalie, and Instagram SnowTheGoalie. So for Ant, for Bundy, I'm Russ. Thanks for listening, perhaps even watching the only Flyers podcast, Snow the Goalie. We'll talk to you again next week.